He was a beggar, and he died. Before he died, his life had been filled with suffering. He was poor. And being poor, he lacked access to the health care that would have treated the sores that covered his body. And being poor, he lacked access to food. Jesus tells us he dreamed of the food that was wasted in the wealthy household for which he laid. And he died. How did he die? We aren't told. I can't imagine he died of natural causes, though. Did he finally die of starvation? I've read starvation is a horrible way to die. Was one of the dogs who licked the sores on his body so overcome with its own hunger that it tore the beggar to pieces? Did he die after being set on fire? That's apparently one way to take care of the homeless population problem in the U.S. Set them on fire the way you burn any offending pile of trash. That's what's been taking place in San Diego. I don't know how he died, but he did. And so did the rich man, before whose house he had spent his final days. And that's where a lot of people like to turn this story into a story about heaven and hell, about reward and punishment, a story about our future, but it's not. It's a story about here and now. It's a tale about a man whose here and now story is a painful one to hear, but not nearly as painful as it was for him to live. And his name was Lazarus. He wasn't some anonymous census statistic. He was a human being with a story and a name. And he was a broken human being whose name was Lazarus. And this isn't a story about the afterlife. It's a condemnation about the present one. His name was Lazarus, but it could just as well have been Omran. That's the name of the boy you see on the screen. And this is now what it looks like to be lucky if you are a child in Syria. This is lucky. Omran was injured a little more than a month ago in a neighborhood in Aleppo, Syria. Omran was rescued with his parents and 3 siblings, ages 1, 6, and 10. His 10-year-old brother Ali died of his injuries 3 days after the rescue. Omran and others like him have recently been compared to a bowl of Skittles candy. But he's not candy. He's a human being with a name, and his name is Omran. In this morning's parable, Jesus speaks of a chasm in the afterlife, one so great that it couldn't be crossed. Picture the Grand Canyon, if you will, or picture the distance between the U.S. and Syria, or picture the distance between yourself and Omran. Remember, this really isn't a story about the afterlife. It's a condemnation of the present one. I recently heard a sermon about this morning's parable, condemning the rich man as well as you and me for not noticing. Not even noticing the poor that are sitting at our gates, a sort of sin of omission. But this goes way beyond any kind of sin of omission, as if we haven't even noticed the needy at our gates. In the parable, the rich man certainly noticed Lazarus, because in the afterlife, the rich man recognized who it was cradled in the arms of Abraham. And he knew exactly who it was, and he recognized him. And not only did he recognize him, but he even knew his name. which means he had taken the time to learn the man's name and still refused to do anything for him. This morning's story reveals the rich man's attitude toward Lazarus, when even after death, he sees Lazarus as nothing more than a servant boy, only good for alleviating his torment, not a single expression of remorse for ignoring the suffering of Lazarus. And so I believe the torment he experienced in the afterlife was simply a reflection of the world he had helped to create while he was alive. And if that's the case, then we have an important question to answer. And the question is, does our faith in and experience of Jesus Christ help us to look into the face of the Lazaruses and Omrons in the world and see them as worthy of our compassion and respect? Are we called to do anything about Omron? Or do we instead build a wall along our nation's border and around our hearts to protect us from him and all those other terrorists disguised as Skittles? Are we called to do anything about the homeless teenagers at the Cove, just a 3-minute drive away from here, virtually at our church's gates? Will we do anything to make their lives better, or will we make sure our own appetites are kept satisfied while offering them our table scraps? Or are we called to do anything about the 74,000 people who were served last year just a 1-minute drive away at Caritas, virtually at our church's doorstep? We can do something, you know. Each year we are given the opportunity to participate in the Crop Hunger Walk, which is only a month and a half away. And each year, few, if any, people grab a walker envelope and bother to ask their friends, family, and co-workers for a donation toward feeding people who are hungry. And if you think I'm fussing, please know I'm as guilty as anyone of putting a donation in the envelope without asking for it from anyone in my own circle of friends. My friends, Lazarus is sitting at our gates, and it's awful nice that we've taken the time to learn his name. But he's hungry, and he's homeless, and he's lonely, and he needs community, and community is supposed to be our middle name. Jesus lived out his days teaching about compassion, and compassion can only come through community. You can't be compassionate by yourself. And it's through compassion that we experience joy. And it's our acts of compassion combined with those of other people who shift things bit by bit in the direction of the kingdom of heaven and the realm of God. And those acts of compassion have to be more than flinging a few coins at a beggar. Martin Luther King Jr. said that true compassion understands that an edifice which produces beggars needs restructuring. It's not a story about the afterlife. It's a story about restructuring the life in which we exist. Restructuring it into one in which lonely people experience community, one in which hungry people are fed, one in which homeless people are given shelter, one in which refugees experience sanctuary, one in which black people are treated the same way that white people are treated, one in which people are not executed for who and how they love or for how they present themselves, one in which Native Americans are not treated as if they are trespassers on their own land. That's what this morning's parable is about. It's not about the afterlife. It's about the here and now, and what we are going to do about the Lazaruses in our world. And you can be sure that today's sermon is probably more a conviction of my own heart and a confession of my own shortcomings than anything else. And so my prayer is that God break through and break open our hearts so that we respond to the Lazaruses in the world before they die. May compassion be a way of life for us. May it replace the fear of others or the fear of not having enough money or time to make a difference. And may we discover joy and meaning and purpose in this life of compassion. Amen.